Oh,
Hello, good afternoon. Well, I'm here with my good friend Scott Mann. Scott, how are you today?
I'm doing great. Thanks, Conan. It's good to see you.
It's very good to see you. We have a little bit of a history together, going back 10 plus years. So why don't we start talk a little bit about how we met, and I'll let you start and add into that, and we'll get caught up on what each of us are doing and the insight that our audience can grab from it.
Yeah. Um, so I had joined ISC, I think, 2 years before. Maybe it was only a year before you joined. Um,
Yes.
and when you joined, you went around, I think, and spoke to most of the engineers, if not all of them. You spent a good amount of time with me talking about things that were working and things that weren't. And we had some really intense conversations around testing in particular, and how critical that we both felt that was, especially for an open source uh, product, essentially that was managed in a closed way. I mean, it's not that you
Yeah.
couldn't make contributions, but it was that there was a team of engineers that were going to code review and evaluate your contributions.
100%. And just to put some
Yeah.
perspective for our listeners, ISC stands for Internet Systems Consortium. They were the makers of Bind, which was the de facto DNS uh,
Protocol.
software that was running on at one point 80%. I joined. I was hired by the board to run it. We were losing a lot of money. It was a nonprofit, so it wasn't meant to make money, but they wanted to, let's say, lose less. And so the first thing I had to do, if I remember correctly, this is 2012, 2014 area when I was there. Um, there was like 20 plus people in engineering, and it was a very flat structure. And it was very interesting to me because the software that was written was it was C++, low level kernel level stuff. So the people that necessarily worked there, particularly on the technical side, were very deep technically, and very, that means a lot of things, but they could operate at a very low level. And we wanted to try to get more predictability in terms of the releases. We wanted to try and get more insight into how we could do things better. And there was no real de facto leader. It was interesting to me. It was kind of everybody was a peer. You guys had tremendous respect for each other, and there was almost a
Right.
hierarchy of technical depth.
It's true. It's true.
And
And then Paul Vixie was at the top. Yeah.
and of course, Paul, who's a legend, who created the whole thing. And so what we did, and I give you a lot of credit for that, was we kind of put a real structure in place. And this is going to segue into what you're doing now, because I think when I look back at your career, it's amazing, uh, the value you've added. You've been at places like IBM, eBay, uh, now at Amazon, and the level of Christmas you bring to the idea of a software development manager, I think is somehow getting lost in the wayside over the years. And so that's kind of what I really want to delve into. But going back to ISC, yeah, tell me what were some of the changes that we made in terms of making a more predictable organization. So that open source was, you're right, it was run by one company. It was open source, so anybody could download the tree and run it, but pretty much everybody came to us for the priority one fixes, and they wanted to use the same. They wanted to be running off the same stack that we were, because we were dedicated to making sure that was the most bug-free stack.
Right. Yeah. And for all intents and purposes, there were a lot of companies out there that had a special interest in having DNS set up by default in certain ways. For instance, uh, they would want it to be set up to serve content over some of the other mechanisms that you could utilize. And that was not our default for a very long time. And so we sort of had a running argument with some of our customers. One thing I will say about uh, the what transpired after your arrival with respect to ISC was that you know, in many ways, a lot of those organizations that wanted us to do things differently were actually on the path to getting what they were after. I mean, when you were working on your plan to take ISC out of kind of this stagnant place and start to move forward again and provide customers what they want, was looking at essentially a different deployment stack so that you could go to companies like, I don't remember off the top of my head, but in today's world, Facebook, Meta would be one of them, where you deploy a stack that would be content oriented as opposed to one that's server oriented. And I think the other part of what I remember about you really driving and making a difference at ISC was building uh, a a more modern way of handling customer support.
Yeah.
Um, and looking at giving people value for in our case, in that case, the contributions they were making, right? So the money
Yeah,
they were paying. Yeah.
yeah, 100%, Scott. Because this is why it's so relevant. What we did, and I can give you a couple stories that I remember very vividly. Was that when I found out the level that we were installed, and when I found out that AT&T, for example, a company that I had known well from previous vendor engagements, had Bind, our version of Bind, installed on 50,000 servers, um, and their last year's donation to us was $50,000. I was incredulous and found the executive there, and we introduced a platinum level plan. And sure enough, we did $1 million deal with AT&T over 2.5, 3 years because they needed that level of support, and they needed to have, we were doing things where the guy in his dorm room running Bind was getting, bug priority one bug releases at the same time as companies that had $100 billion network, and so we just instituted some process there. But it's interesting now. So yeah, I'd love to hear some of the takeaways. I want to give you a lot of credit for we putting a lot of process in place that was desperately needed in terms of having reliability on dates when we could get releases out. And I love that you brought up QA because that was a big push. We ended up investing a lot in both machines and both processes, hardware and people to make sure that we had a more thorough, robust QA process. Um, one of the things so that was one form of open source. Now, what we have now, and I love your insight on this too, is what we call the open core model. Um, and I want to get into what you're doing. Actually, why don't we do that? Why don't you walk us through kind of a little bit about your career hierarchy, and then we'll get to kind of the open core model, what I see at Amazon on the AWS side, and then what you're doing for Amazon internally in terms of software development.
Nice. Yeah. So just a quick background. I started off life as a individual working towards a PhD in mathematics, but I got an offer from a commercial company after I got my master's that was so much money I just couldn't say no. And so I sort of stumbled into this business. But during that time, I became a software developer, wrote mostly code in C, very close to the hardware, did a lot of device drivers, kernel work, things of that nature. Over time, got into embedded systems, and then eventually got into some tech leadership roles. And I started to study management as a serious thing as opposed to what I had experienced in my career. There were a lot of anti patterns for managers. And among the things that I learned and took with me, and I think I learned a lot of this in practice at ISC, and that was that, first and foremost, if you want to be efficient and effective, then you have to be consistent and you have to plan consistently,
Yeah.
and you have to make that a priority. And regardless of what method you use, whether it's Agile, Scrum, or something like Waterfall, it doesn't really matter. If you're disciplined and you stick to it, then you'll be able to put plans in place and you'll be able to predict with relatively good accuracy uh, the time it's going to take to get something out the door. And and not only get it out the door, but also ensure that it is a functioning and largely bug-free release.
Yeah.
Um, I'm not trying to make too much out of that, but I do know that when you stick with that approach and you get everybody on board with it, the engineers really get into a pattern, and it's just like a well-oiled machine.
Well, no,
Things.
so I know I'm glad you're bringing that because when I look at your trajectory and your career and your as a software executive, I think you're one of the few people that can really speak to what the lost art of software development management. And what I mean by that is that well, now things are changing. So we're going to get your viewpoint on kind of how code development in 2023 and the advent of copilots and AI is. But this idea of an optimal team. But we all started off learning about the mythical man month, and how just throwing people that think can't solve the problems. I'd love to get your insight, and I know it's dependent because I know it's dependent on the context. Because like you said, you've done things that are very low level to device driven level, and you've done stuff that's kind of more building tools for people to help it. What kind of nuggets can you see when you're trying to build a team? What's optimal team size? You mentioned different types of methodologies. Is there one that you think works better than the others? What are the kind of the tools and the environment that you think people should be looking at as they run software teams?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. It depends.
Exactly. Yeah.
So here's a couple general comments I'll make that I've seen over the years, and these are things that we should get back to. And one of them is that we get engineers that come out of college. They're very good at writing code. They know algorithms inside and out. Um, they probably understand a couple of different languages, probably Java and Python. There may be some folks who learn a few more languages, and all that's great. But what they don't know a lot about, first and foremost, is the system on which they're writing the code.
Right.
So most infrastructure at large scale is Linux. Maybe all is at Linux. I don't know, but I suspect it's the vast majority of the market. And the other part of that is scaling includes networking. And I can tell you some of the interviews I've had with people asking them just basic questions about networking, and the answers I get are flabbergasting. So this is one area where anybody listening out there, if you really want to um, in, increase your skills and capabilities in this space, learn about systems, learn about networking. They will serve those that knowledge will serve you really well going forward. And in particular, as we enter the age of AI and machine learning and other kinds of really sophisticated algorithms, the behavior patterns are going to require your understanding of everything that's there to support them, the infrastructure. If you understand enough about how all that works, you'll be able to discern between having problems with, say, communicating over the network versus problems transmitting data in some, through your application or something of that sort.
I got you. Yeah,
There's,
that's wonderful advice for people entering the workforce. Well, the other thing is that the fundamental notion of a software designer in the world of AI, when you're doing machine learning, um, it's very different than the old days of coding. In one case, you're kind of basically instructing a model to watch things and come up with behavior as opposed to kind of controlling the machine. Talk a little bit about how software development is changing. When you do most of your hiring, are you looking for what we call freshers, people out of school that are hard, that work hard and are smart? Are you looking for more experienced people? What does Amazon look for when they're hiring hardcore developers?
so Amazon looks at both. We do have a student hiring program where we hire college grads, both bachelor's degree and master's degree, and occasionally PhDs right out of school. So they don't have to have any experience. Um, the kinds of people we look for there, at least the kinds of people that I tend to look for are people who not only have the expected knowledge that we talked about earlier, but also are curious.
Yeah.
They, when you bring up a topic, I'm looking for them to ask me questions. Um, if I say to you, for example, something simple, maybe the interview question is something along the lines of, "Hey, so why don't you design an online bookstore for me?" Which is always fun because everybody gets the giggles right away. Oh, I know what you're doing.
Yeah.
So, and and putting people in that place where it's something tangible, real that you can talk about, and actually, as a recent college grad, you will have the skills to be able to put something together that would actually work. It's a fun conversation for them, but within that conversation, there's a lot of depth because there's so many factors involved and so many ways you can go.
Right.
And what I look for, not necessarily the right answers. In fact, I don't look for the right answers at all,
Yeah.
unless they're egregiously wrong, right? Then I worry. But
Yeah.
but I'm looking for the person who's going to probe me. Well, what about this? What
Ab-
about scaling? What
Absolutely.
about,
Their approach to the problem. That's such a great question. And it is ironic because the company you work for built not the world's largest bookstore, but now has a bigger business selling the infrastructure that basically it used to build that big
yeah,
store. So
yeah,
it's an amazing. I mean, Amazon is an amazing company. The more I read about, I've read several books about it. The more I study it, the more impressed I am. Um, I did participate in the AWS reInvent in Las Vegas last week or a week and a half ago, and it's just amazing the trajectory. Can you talk about that? Because when someone from the outside, like myself, and I know you're not on the AWS team necessarily selling stuff out to customers, but it's just remarkable how they've kept solving customer problems and making them kind of, I mean, it's probably a little problem for customers because their Amazon AWS bill keeps getting bigger and bigger, but the amount of services that are offered, the amount of models that are offered are just phenomenal. And that must be a culture thing in terms of moving the ball so quickly down the field.
yeah, it is, and I think it's one of the reasons for Amazon's success. They have this set of leadership principles. There's 16 of them now, and actually they're published online. You can search Google and find them.
Okay.
I don't know if that was a deliberate publication or if somebody leaked it at some point, but they're there. Um, and and one of the things it does is it gives the company a framework and a foundation. And I've been with a number of big companies, as you pointed out, IBM. I previously was with DEC, Sun Microsystems, um, SGI, all pretty good sized companies over,
All, by the way, all legendary companies. For a Valley historian like me, those are all legendary companies in the history of Silicon Valley.
yeah, they certainly were exciting at the time I was with them.
Yeah.
Um, Great places to be, things to learn. This is why people want to come to work for Amazon, right? It's a great place to learn, and the opportunities are just endless.
Yeah.
But getting back to, why does Amazon continue to do this? It's a culture that's been built deliberately, with lots of thought being put into it from the beginning. And I'm not saying that Amazon's a panacea. It's not for everybody. But if you come here and you like challenges and you like to work hard, it's a great place.
Yeah.
You'll learn a lot and you'll grow a lot.
Yeah. So one of the things, so we were talking, I mean, just to connect the dots here, we were talking about open source and we were talking about the different models. And there's this thing called open core now that people tend to be doing. There's a lot of venture-backed companies that were started by the people that built the open source tree and then built a commercial version. And so we see that. I can give you, there's hundreds of examples of that. What we see with Amazon is, and this is to their credit, it's not a dig in any way. They take a lot of open source and they provide it on their cloud, which means I don't have to install it. I don't have to worry about it being up. It's guaranteed uptime, and you let me run the open source, on your cloud, and I don't have to do anything except kind of have the user interface to it. And that's kind of been a very powerful part of the Amazon offering, is kind of taking that, what we call, I guess you'd call it managed open source, putting it on their cloud, and then taking out some of the technology risk and the implementation risk for the enterprise.
Yeah, it is. I got to be honest. I'm not terribly familiar with the customer user
Yeah,
interface
yeah, yeah,
because,
yeah.
yeah, I don't use that very often. Um, but the
But
things I've
that's a good question though, Scott. Do you, so we're going to talk, I want you to talk a little bit about team size. What's the optimal team size and how before you lever it up. But let's talk a little bit about the tools that you use internally. You don't use AWS's tool set for your development team?
Oh yeah, of
Yeah,
course, yeah,
yeah, of course. Yeah, yeah. So that's a pretty much the same kind of, some of the tools are the same that they offer on their cloud, right?
yes. Although I don't know the nuances around what's offered externally versus internally. Yeah,
I see. I see.
yeah.
So tell me about a little bit about to the extent you can, about the tools that you use, and kind of talk to me about team side. When you're building a team, what's too big? We always have that saying, it takes 9 months to make a baby, no matter how many women you can get pregnant. Uh,
That's right.
yeah,
That's right.
uh, yeah,
Yeah. So I'll take that last one first. I think the right team size, it varies, but within within this within the scale and scope of most software engineering applications today, you're going to own a piece of something big, or you're going to own the entirety of something small. And how many people it takes is, as we discussed, depends. It depended on the piece. So if you work for a company like Amazon and you work on uh, the internal infrastructure, essentially, which is what AWS is all about, it's providing that cloud service through both hard and virtual uh, um, capabilities, that your software teams should probably land. I mean, there's this two pizza team concept within Amazon that I think is known by most folks. It's roughly 5 to 7. Sometimes you hear 5 to 8 people on the team. It's basically how many people can two pizzas serve. And I think there's a certain aspect to that that's generally speaking true. Having 5 to 8 folks of different levels works really well. I mean, it means you can spend a lot of time with those folks and really um, build a lot of team spirit. Uh, I think that growing teams bigger than that is something that I've done in the past and have been successful with. But to be honest, most of the time those teams have been more senior.
are people that are saying that, hey, given where we are now, don't tell your kids in college or in high school to study computer programming anymore, because these LLMs are so facile with different environments. It's going to be much more better to understand, like you said, the context, the business problem, the data structures, and then leave the detailed coding to that. And so I think that we're at a very interesting time. I'm not saying that anybody knows this, but it's really remarkable. Like I see that in QA tech. At ISC, one of the things that we put a lot. In fact, we even bought specialized hardware to do testing for lots of. I think we spent $500,000 on one machine. But the point I'm making is that QA is completely solved right now. If you give the appropriate model kind of the code, it can come up with a complete coverage analysis and do it. So they always say, may you be lucky to live in interesting times, and we live in very interesting times when it comes to
We
stuff.
do, we do.
Yes.
One thing I would kind of add to that, I agree with you about the testing, and another thing about it is I'm hopeful that these algorithms over time will be able to start to predict some of the higher order effects that our software has at scale
Yeah.
that humans have difficulty, getting insight into. Um, and if we can do that, actually, we will realize this very very fast adapting, completely capable software paradigm that it's essentially the software lifecycle that does it all by itself. It goes out, finds the bugs, fixes them, and then comes back to you with a final product.
Yeah.
That'd be cool.
Well, Scott, it's amazing to talk to you. I'm so happy for you, and I'm proud to watch your career flourish. 11 years ago, when I met you, I knew you were something very special because you not only had technical depth, but you had the emotional maturity and kind of the people skills to kind of bring out the best in people. And that, whoever you're working for are very lucky. And so I'm glad we
Oh,
got to
thank
spend this time together. And your insights about what you're looking for and what's going on with software development are going to be very helpful for everyone. So
you.
thanks
Oh,
again,
cool.
Scott.
Thanks. Take care. Good talking to you.